I'm really excited about this next segment, and while I'm kind of introducing it, could I ask each one of our elected officials that has agreed to be part of our legislative panel to come up, please, and take your seat. This is a rare opportunity for us to get to hear from so many dedicated legislative officials about this important subject. The role of the state with philanthropy and nonprofit organizations. And Heather Steans, who is a former Donors Forum board member, and is on the board of her family's foundation, which is a member of Donors Forum, and is such a good friend of our sector, is going to moderate this conversation. And I'm going to allow her to introduce her colleagues. But after this part of the program, the heavy lifting is on you. There are cards on the table. I really encourage you to, as they are speaking and answering questions, to think about the questions that you want to ask them, as well as Kyle, and we'll give Kyle an opportunity to get up here too. So without further ado, let me once again thank all of you so much for coming. I hope that this becomes a much more regular event, and that this dialogue that we're going to have right now will just be the very beginning of long and sustained dialogue in the future. So thanks, and Senator Steans, turning it over to you.
Great. All right, well, thank you so much. I am thrilled that Valerie and everyone at the Donors Forum asked me to be here with you today. Oh, yeah, you can take that down, thanks. You know, she, as always, has done an amazing job, I think, setting the stage for this panel in her true style that she always has, with the opening remarks from Governor Edgar, and then with Kyle Caldwell's very specific thoughts and suggestions on how Michigan has done it, and some real ideas already to, I think, sort of get the ball rolling here in the way we think about how might we improve this partnership here in Illinois between government and the nonprofit sector. And when Valerie asked if I'd be willing to moderate, it was a no-brainer for me to jump at the opportunity. As I've really served, my family has a foundation, so I serve as a trustee on that still. I've worked in nonprofit organizations, and now I obviously serve in governmental roles. So, you know, I definitely have friends on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, and think I can sort of understand, wearing a little bit of both hats, how things work. And it's always been my personal view, I believe deeply in what you're trying to accomplish here, that there's real roles and a real need to have all these different sectors come together to more effectively address problems. You know, the nonprofit world, generally speaking, is a lot more nimble, creative. They can test ideas in a way that big bureaucracies can't. Foundations can really help fund and test that creativity that's going on in the nonprofit sector, and really provide research and great data about what is working and what's not, and then take that to government between the nonprofits and the foundations to help scale up and change the policies that need to be changed to sort of make those best practices go to scale. There's real natural synergies here when you're working it. But unfortunately, as we know, things don't always work in that ideal fashion. And there's lots of room for improvement here in Illinois. We see that now, too, as members of the General Assembly with all the challenges that are going on in the state of Illinois. You know, they've been touched on. It's hard to live here and not read and understand about the pension problems. That we may be on track to be the next Detroit, as Kyle was saying, is certainly in the papers regularly. We know we have huge backlogs of unpaid bills. That's coming down, definitely, but it definitely impacts the nonprofit sector, without a doubt. And yet, despite all these dynamics, we know that government and nonprofit have that compassion to reach and need to work together to address the needs in all of our communities, and they really do focus together on sort of our most vulnerable citizens. So I am thrilled to be able to be here today and sort of be a part of this conversation, and how can we strengthen this partnership. And we have a terrific panel of legislators here today. I'm really thrilled to be here with them. We have Senators Koehler from Peoria, Chapin Rose from the Champaign area, Patricia Van Pelt from Chicago, and then Representatives Kelly Burke from Oak Lawn, Lisa Hernandez from Cicero, David McSweeny from Barrington Hills, and Sandy Pihos from Glen Ellyn. And I can tell you, having worked with them, it's a very talented group, very diligent and responsive to the nonprofits in their own districts, and working with sort of the state partners that need to help their nonprofits flourish in those areas, and look at what they're doing on a statewide level to help or hinder that progress. You're going to hear and see today that this really is a group of problem solvers, really creative thinkers, and I'm very thankful that they are participating with us here today. So what I thought we were going to do now is we're going to hear first, I'll ask some questions to the panelists. We'll probably do that for about a half an hour. And I'll ask each of them to take the lead on one question, and if somebody wants to pipe in behind that lead responder, they can, but then I'll go to the next panelist to answer a second question, so we're not all answering all the same questions, and we can get through more. And then after about a half an hour, we'll turn it over to questions. I'll get input from questions from you all in the audience, and ideas, if you have ideas that you'd like folks to react to here, or a question, whatever it is you have. As Valerie, I think, mentioned, you have cards on the table, and representatives will be coming around and collecting those. And then they'll be coming to me, and we can get into some of that. So, thank you all very much for your attention here today on this very important issue. And I'm going to just go down the line here, so I'll start with Representative Burke. We're in alphabetical order here. I'd like to first ask you, sort of to set the stage, in your opinion, what does a good, strong government-nonprofit partnership look like?
First, is this on? Can you guys hear? Okay. So the first thing I think that is real important is you have to know your local legislators. I think that is something that you need a champion. You need someone who understands what your organization does and can advocate for you. And I think most nonprofits do a pretty good job of that. I have a little bit of background in the nonprofit world. I was in development for a local university, and I was also a board member of a public library board. So we were at a situation where obviously we got a ton of government funding through property taxes and whatnot, but we needed to diversify where we were looking for dollars. I'm sure a lot of you are in the exact same spot. And so we would go after grant programs and whatnot from foundations. So, I mean, I'm familiar with it from both sides of the question. And what I find sometimes is that groups in my district, the first time I hear from them, even though I've sent them letters of introduction, hey, let's get together, let's do this, is when they have a problem. And that's not the first time you want to be meeting your legislator, your state representative, your state senator. You want them to know you and to think that what you do is a good job and that what services you're offering are good for the state. So I would say get to know your legislators, number one. And second of all, do some homework on the appropriations process, where the money's coming from. Senator Steans obviously is very involved in that aspect. In the Senate, there are fewer individual lawmakers who are on Appropriations Committee. The House, there's a lot. So, go on the ILGA website, see who, what Appropriations Committee your state funding, if you do receive it, comes through, and get to know those people as well.
Okay, who else would like to add something about what do you think is the sort of, in your opinion, what does a good government nonprofit partnership look like? Anyone else on the panel want to add to that? Lisa? Representative Hernandez?
So I like to share, I think I'm one of the lucky ones that came into an existing already dialogue that began where I represent the Cicero area, and what occurred was the youth there was such a lack of services, and so over a span of about 5 years, even before I came into office, a task force was created specifically aimed at the youth. And these were a gathering of nonprofits, school districts, and really became a sort of model to mirror off of what partnerships can do. Because soon after, that is when the ball started rolling. It was because of them actually, elected were informed of the issues and what we needed to do to bring this service to the youth. So I believe I came into it. So there is those of you who have already pretty much stepped up to the plate. And so I think that we need to also look at what exists. And I wanted to share because it's something that I'm very proud and very successful this task force has become in this area. So.
All right, thank you. Next question, I'm going to start at the other end and go back and forth. So Senator Van Pelt, next question, I'll start with you. What are your preliminary thoughts on an overall opportunities to strengthen partnerships between nonprofits and state government? How can we sort of prove our current status to get to a more ideal situation between partnerships between government and nonprofits in Illinois?
Thank you, Heather. Well, number one, I think that it's important for us to have events like this, because this brings the legislators to the table and the nonprofits together to begin to acknowledge that, yes, we do have a challenge in figuring out how to bring these two parties together when they are very valuable to each other. In fact, they're working together, just not acknowledged as really working together, or I think the government really does not acknowledge the value of the nonprofit. So I think, number one, having events like this, and perhaps after this, forming some smaller group that will really think about what are ways we can move forward together and really bring the government into a place where they can be comfortable with acknowledging the value of the nonprofit and helping the government to meet its needs through service delivery, and also how the nonprofit brings knowledge, learning, and information to the fore about what's happening on the ground, which us in government may or may not know about. And the other thing, of course, is bringing in the volunteers and advocating for the kinds of changes that are needed. I think I ran a nonprofit for years, so I've been on the outside pushing in, and now I'm on the inside, and I understand why had to be such a push. I always thought that the government should just know. You know, they're in those positions, they're in those seats, they should know what's going on in their own district. That's what I thought. But now I understand, because the issues are so complex and there's so many, there's no way for them to know the whole story. So like Ms. Burke said a few minutes ago, Representative Burke said, it's important for the nonprofit to come in and have a conversation with the legislator in advance so they can learn the issue and also become a true advocate for them and a cheerleader for the group when it comes to funding. So number one, I think that we need to have meetings like this. Secondly, form task force to figure out how to move forward as a group. And number three, see how we can bring those ideas to the fore.
Representative Pihos?
Yes, thank you. I not only sit on a few non-for-profit boards, but my non-for-profits in my district do an incredible job, and I think I know most of them, not only in my district, but in all of DuPage County. And survival for many of our particular communities are based on our non-for-profit work. But I think this is all about education. The first time I heard of the Donors Forum was actually through Senator Steans, who brought someone from the Donors Forum to the Conference of Women Legislators to speak to it. And I think you have to grow your roots. I loved Kyle's idea of a caucus, maybe even over a task force in the beginning. I would be happy to volunteer myself on the House Republican side to have a discussion about that. But you know, there are many people that don't understand the workings of non-for-profits. What happens is an individual non-for-profit comes into us, so we understand that non-for-profit. But what I think you have to do is educate the entire General Assembly, not about specific non-for-profits, but just about non-for-profit work in general. And I think you have to build and put your actions forward slowly. You have to build the grassroots just like you do in any kind of campaign. So I think that's very important. And the other thing I would say is your non-for-profits have to work together not to be competitive, but to help highlight one another and support one another, because if they're doing that and we don't have that competition on our plate, there can be a lot more positive outreach that will benefit everybody, I think.
Yes, I would definitely add on, when a sector comes together around some policy issue and they've come together and collaboratively, it's much easier not to divide and conquer us legislators when that does happen. I'm going to turn now to Senator Koehler for the next question. It seems like state governments view nonprofits now more as vendors on occasion. I think that's the way they get treated. Certainly the way I hear nonprofits feel like they're getting treated in any event, more than they're actually getting treated like partners. How do you think we can work to change that perception and that reality so that it is more of a true partnership, not a sort of just a vendor-payee relationship?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and thank you for inviting me here today. Before I answer that, many of you have made comments and shared your sympathies about what's going on in central Illinois. Things are pretty devastating right now. While we're sitting here having lunch, families are collecting their final belongings because at 5 o'clock tonight they start to bulldoze some of the houses. So it's quite an ordeal we're going through. I think that not-for-profit organizations need to understand what it means to be in partnership with the government. And the government needs to also understand that from a different perspective. From the government side, we need to see that the not-for-profits are not competitors but collaborators. And I think that sometimes there's friction on that end. What I always say to the community and to our not-for-profit groups in my area, in Peoria, is that this is some of the best tax dollars that we spend is what we spend with our partners in the not-for-profit organizations. Because if it weren't for your groups out there doing the work that you do, we couldn't afford as a state government to replicate that. Number one, you have your own fundraising locally that you do. You have your own boards of directors that represent the needs and the wishes of the local community. All of that is invaluable because, again, that is not something that the state or government can replicate. It's important to understand that if you're going to be in that partnership, though, you have to play somewhat by the same rules that government plays by. And that is, number one, transparency is just absolutely ultimate. Everything we do has to be transparent. Number two, accountability goes with it. And so I think that what we have developed in Peoria is, in the central Illinois area, is really a good collaboration between all the directors of our not-for-profit organizations that meet usually on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, and they call us in to have this conversation, a lot of it around money and lack of payment. But we begin to understand the needs of the groups, and we can kind of help bridge that because we're not the executive branch, we're the legislative branch. And so we have to, in a sense, be the advocates sometimes for the not-for-profit voices back to the administration and to say, hey, you need to listen to some folks. So I think we all have a different role to play in this. We just need to make sure that we communicate and understand what that role is and challenge each other when we have to, but also collaboration is the key.
Representative McSweeny?
I was a township trustee in Palatine Township, and we didn't set up an infrastructure for human needs. We actually funded nonprofits. And I think that's actually a model for the state. I'm a businessman by background, and I know that we can leverage the dollars. And let's just have some straight talk where we are here in the state. We have 9.2% unemployment. We have $7 billion of unpaid bills. We have $100 billion of unfunded pension liabilities. And I think a big part of actually ensuring that we have adequate funding for human resources in the future is to do pension reform. That's something we're going to address over the next couple of weeks. And it is important to everybody in this room, because that money is now being used. The money that was raised by the tax increase a couple of years ago, it's being used to fund pension obligations. If we could convert some of that money to reforming and saving the system and actually directly aiding nonprofits, I think we're going to be better off as a state long term. So as a businessman, as a former township trustee, I think the caucus idea is a good one, but beyond that, I think we could really leverage our dollars because the administrative costs of nonprofits are a lot less than they are for the state. The efficiency, the delivery in the devastated area, obviously, that the senator represents. The Red Cross obviously does great work, and all the other nonprofits that are helping in the area. So my view is that we should shoot for a radical partnership, which means that we should actually be directly funding nonprofits, setting up a competitive process every year. There has to be accountability every year, that you're just not going to give the same dollars to a nonprofit because they got it the previous year. You start with a zero-based budget. You decide where it's needed over time. And I also am a strong supporter. I'm on the Revenue Committee of the Endow Illinois Tax Credit Bill that sets up a tax credit for foundations that have endowments, and I'm very hopeful that hopefully we'll see that in the process in the future. So developing that partnership and actually using nonprofits as a way to fund our human service needs, I think, is a very important part of the future of the state.
All right, Senator Rose, I'm going to bring you into the conversation here too. Do you think there's anything specific that you might want to mention on how we in Illinois, the state government, can make it easier for nonprofits to do their work with the state?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a great question. First of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank everybody in the room for your service to our state, and on behalf of, like Senator Koehler, my area got hit pretty hard by Sunday storms. Particularly those of you who are in relief efforts, we really appreciate all of you. And it's pretty tough right now in a few parts of Illinois, but we do appreciate all the help. Something that we did a few years ago was the Management Improvement Initiative. And if you look on the back of this booklet that was handed out, a lot of these bullet points came from the Management Improvement Initiative. And that was a outgrowth of a series of hearings that we had in Central Illinois, primarily with development disabled mental health providers. But one of the areas that, there's sort of this fundamental, so you've got the government, you've got the nonprofits, and how that interaction occurs. I mean, yes, we have late payments to deal with and sort of these macro level things, but there are micro level issues of how many times a year are you being audited? Are you being audited for the same thing every year? And we tried through the Management Improvement Initiative to sort of streamline some of that, tear down some of these silos that pop up, and ultimately get back to providing the core kind of service. Now that was, again, primarily in DDMI field, but I think there's an important lesson there that it wasn't a legislator or a nonprofit. It was a group of people sitting around over the course of a couple months having hearings that ultimately led into the initiative and some actual results. I would add a parenthetical reference to this, and who you have as governor is very, very important. Obviously, I'm biased because I'm from the same hometown as Governor Edgar, but you sort of have the gold standard for managing the ship of state sitting over here. And a lot of the things that we did on the Management Improvement Initiative, frankly, did not take passage of legislation to do it. A good governor managing the ship of state could have just done it. And so I think there's, again, an as critical piece here when you talk about legislature and nonprofit. It's who is the bureaucracy in the executive office. And do they know what they're doing? Are they new to it? Are they friend? Are they foe? And how that all works and interrelates is critical, frankly, at the end of the day, because, again, DDMI, the new fiscal year began July 1st. They built their budgets back in April and May and approved those budgets. And then in September, they get a note from the state saying, oh, by the way, we're going to prorate your funds. Well, if the state's going to do that, they should have told them before July 1st so they could deal with it, as opposed to being halfway through the first quarter when they have to scramble to figure out how to balance. And I think that back end, not in a bad way, but that back end bureaucracy in a denotative sense, not a connotative sense of the word, is incredibly important in this conversation.
And let me just follow up on that, Representative Hernandez. One of the suggestions that Kyle Caldwell had made that they had done in Michigan that I sort of think of based on Senator Rose's comments there is creating an office of foundation liaisons within the governor's office, somebody who can sort of serve that role. Do you think this is one way that might serve Illinois well in terms of making it easier for nonprofits to work with the state and the state to work with nonprofits both ways, or what's your reaction to that?
I think so. I mean, I I always viewed that we have our entities, our groups within government, that we reach out the various commissions. That's internal. There's also, I would view the advocates, the nonprofits, as the external. So there's two views and a different sense of pulse of the community that they bring, that they're essential. They're part of what makes it right. So to include the nonprofit component, yes, I think it just makes sense. It's common sense there and way overdue.
One other thing, it's mindful to me, I'm going to ask this to Representative Pihos first, that I think foundations and nonprofits really have a lot of expertise as is research, data, what is and what is not working well. How do you think the state could more fully be tapping into this? Or do you think we're doing that well right now? I should start, and how do you think we can improve upon that?
Thank you. Well, I think empirical evidence is always a way to make your case, but we have to make sure it's incredible empirical evidence, and we have to be willing to take on a challenge to answer some of the pieces of information that may come out of the research that's done. But I mean, I think you necessarily can take the charge and bring the information to us. I think we need to process it and then have an open conversation about the credibility of the information and where it can fit in to supporting what we're trying to move forward. I think we have to remember all the non-for-profits work very hard to sustain themselves, and they're stakeholders in the process, but we're also stakeholders in the process because we value the work that they do, and they know that we know that we couldn't move forward in the way that we do without them. So I think it's important to remember that this is a bipartisan effort. It's important to explain the information that is brought forward, the research, and I think a lot of the decisions we make are based on due diligence and research. So I think that you should continue with that effort because I think it's important for us to have strong information when we make our decisions.
And Senator Van Pelt?
Yes, let me just add that I think with all the information that the nonprofit brings to the table, the research, the knowledge, the passion, it would be very important for the government agencies to bring in those nonprofits before they develop RFPs. They should be a part of the beginning conversations about the challenge because they have more experience, they have people on the ground, and we would have much better, more successful programs as a result. In my district, there's a program called Teen Challenge. All on the outskirts of the district where the area's a little better off, well off, they all have Teen Challenge programs. The ones on the inside, like on the west side of Chicago, they don't have Teen Challenge Teen Reach programs inside of those areas. And the reason why, I question, why is it that only in the better areas of the community where they probably don't even need it, they don't have it, and then inside, they said, well, what we did was go through their records and see who was most successful at keeping this program going, and the ones on the outskirts were. Well, if they had thought about perhaps bringing nonprofits in that were on the ground in those areas, maybe they could have figured out a way to make that program work by changing some of the things that they had. Because sometimes if there's a gang war, they can't cross the gang line for maybe 3 weeks, so maybe the program can be offered in a different way. So bringing in the nonprofits that have the experience on the ground early on to help them to design programs, I believe is the answer. And on the other question about the vendors and how do we move from thinking about nonprofits as vendors, that starts at the top. So I think we need to get to the governor, help him to lay it out, this is what I want, and then it's important for his supervisors to know his ideas and they institute those ideas. That's it. Thank you.
So I want to, and we're going to be turning, I think, shortly to some of the audience questions, but sort of thinking outside of the current Illinois box, do you think there's new opportunities you see where nonprofits could be helping us in Illinois meet unmet needs right now that exist out there? What sort of you see as new opportunities for nonprofits to be meeting some needs that currently are right now not getting addressed? Senator McSweeny, Representative McSweeny.
As I said before, I think actually we need to have radical change in this state. I think that funding nonprofits through partnerships, even if you do a funding combination, I think is the future. We're going to have very scarce resources under any scenario in the future. And if you look at the model of allowing nonprofits to do the work with accountability, with an annual review process, I think we're going to be better off in this state. And as a businessman, I'm not a big one for studies and commissions, but I do think one study that actually would be very helpful, and it doesn't actually have to be funded by government, is to take a look at all of our state services and see areas in which nonprofits could actually fill the void with funding. Because again, I maintain that the administrative costs and the efficiencies of nonprofits are far superior to the government. We have great state employees. I'm not criticizing anyone, but again, I look at the numbers, and I'm a numbers person and know that that is the truth. So my view is that we should look, and I've used the word 3 times, I'll use it the 4th time, at radical changes in the way that we're funding our social services here in this state under scarce resources. And my view is we're going to get our biggest bang for the buck by either funding nonprofits directly or partnering with accountability, with annual review process. And I think the most helpful thing that can be done right now by the nonprofit community is to come to us with specific suggestions of areas in which nonprofits could actually do it better than the state or fill in voids. So that's my view.
And I thank Senator Van Pelt. Did you have something on this? And then
Yes,
Representative
a new area to address. One of the biggest challenges I see that we have in our state is that we release 37,000 prisoners back into our communities every year across the state, 25,000 just in Chicago. Then they take in about another 35,000 every year as well. We have a cycle, we have a revolving door going on here, and we're paying out of the nose for it, and we will continue to pay. The longer we keep this cycle going without addressing reintegration, we are digging deep into future generations and also putting them on a pathway to prison as well. So I think it's important that we turn our attention toward having a state-sanctioned reintegration plan. Because I believe if the Department of Corrections take the people in, they should correct them. And if they cannot correct them, then it's wrong for them just to regurgitate them back into the community with no way for the community to reabsorb those people. We're just sitting ducks. We're just, when they get out, it's 25,000 every year in Chicago. We're just sitting ducks, waiting for them to commit the next crime, because over, nearly half of them will be back in prison, not because they decided, I want to go to prison, no, but because they committed crimes and taken from us and hurt us and wounded us until they go back to prison again. And that cycle continues when the father's not there. He's not there to help his son. His son grows up not knowing what a father is or how to respond to the challenges he faced. If the schools, can't really get to the kids and teach them the way they want because there's so many other challenges. So I think that's one of the issues that we really have to focus in on that we're not doing a good job at right now.
Okay, we've gotten some great questions from the audience. Oh, Representative Pihos, I'm sorry, did you want to add something to that? Okay. How do you, as a state legislator, balance your role representing your district versus the entire state? Specifically, if a local nonprofit asks you to intervene regarding their funding, how would you determine their case for support versus others who may or may not be more impactful with their services? Representative Burke?
So I think there's 2 aspects to that. And it's something that we've touched on is having some metrics or some proof or evidence that your program actually works. And I think we're trying to do that through the budgeting for results process. Some of you have probably been involved in it. And it's evolving. It's something we're trying to get our arms around. But anyone who relies on foundation or corporate funding probably is a step ahead in this game because they're used to coming up with metrics. They're used to being able to prove that their program works. So I think that's number one is, we may have a favorite, local nonprofit, but they still need to show that what they're doing is A, something that is needed, and B, that it's effective. And I think that way you can kind of balance out the state's needs versus your local need. So I think that kind of reinforces the importance of having a good dialogue with your local folks as well.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah.
Senator Hernandez? Representative, I'm sorry.
I also would like to add that at least sitting on the Appropriations Human Services Committee, one of the areas that we are very closely looking at is if you invest dollars, what's the return investment? So that is key. That's identifying those nonprofits that they're going to shine. So that is definitely an area that the members are looking at.
Another question from the audience. What do you view as the most promising solution to improved funding for nonprofits? Tax reform, pension reform, improved budget process, or something else? Senator Van Pelt?
Pension reform.
Tax reform, okay. Senator Rose?
So this is totally in the something else category, but something that I've been kicking around quite a bit. How many of you are owed money by the state right now behind your organizations, or several of you? So if you gave a targeted
And
tax...
those are just the brave ones that raise their
Yeah,
hands, probably,
yeah.
Which
Which in my area would have been the whole room. So, but one of the things that we've been kicking around back home is a targeted tax credit for nonprofits who are owed money by the state, whereby a donor would pay off part of what the state's owed, and then they would get a deduction for that. So it brings the non-for-profit, maybe not current, but advances the ball, and it actually costs the taxpayers not nearly as much as it would have otherwise cost them to advance that ball. And frankly, this is the first time I've shared this publicly with anybody because I've been kicking around. There's a lot of pitfalls in how you would come up with this. But for, for your local nonprofit providers who are owed money by the state, which is a lot of people, you could actually cut a lot of that debt position in half in a way that's very responsible for the taxpayers. And, how much you do, how far you go would determine the ultimate outcome of how much you could pay off. But something I'm kicking around, and we don't have time for it here, but I'd love people's comments later via email or something.
And I'm going to keep going down the row on this one in terms of best solution to improving funding for nonprofits, tax reform, pension reform, improved budget process, or something else like Senator Rose did. Representative Pihos?
Well, obviously, we all know we're dealing with a financial crisis. Pension reform is needed. After that, I think the way we spend our money, the way we set our budgets is going to be critical, that we spend them in the most essential areas. So I think we're going to have to be very careful to be able to cut non-essential programs. I always measure everything up against who is going to suffer and what is that person or those people going to lose if we don't have this in our budget. And I think that's very important. So I think it's critical to set our budget in a way that we're considering our essential programs first, because it doesn't matter how much money we have, I have to say, because we want your nonprofits to deliver a quality of effective service, putting the people first. So it's not just all about the money, it's what limited resources we have and how we spend that money most efficiently and effectively.
Representative McSweeny?
Yeah, I think this is the most important question that's been asked, because this is something that we are dealing with every day and need to deal with immediately. So let's just talk about the numbers. In fiscal year 2013, the revenues for the state were $33.7 billion for what we call our general funds budget. This fiscal year, $35.6 billion, and actually it looks like we're going to have an increase in revenue of about $322 million. So there's been a $2 billion increase in revenues. The issue is, in my view, is looking at the spending side and saving the pension system. Right now, you have $7.6 billion that's being used for annual pension obligations, and the system is only 39% funded. And that's assuming an 8% rate of return over time. So that is an essential first step, ensuring that we free up money for human services in the future. And one of the things, as a member of the Revenue Committee, that makes me the most upset these days The only people that are able to get tax breaks, or the only entities, are the big corporations who have their hands out asking for special tax breaks. My view is that we should lower tax rates for every individual, small businesses especially, so we create more jobs. If we create more jobs, we create more revenues. So I think lowering tax rates, adopting pension reform, and controlling spending are the most important parts of our fiscal future if we're going to improve our situation. We have the lowest credit rating in the country, and that means something. It means that we pay much more when we borrow. It means we have less money for social services, and I think it's just absolutely essential that we adopt pension reform.
Senator Koehler?
I think the two areas of the budget that are most in competition are probably education and human services. Other parts of the budget, pension has been mentioned. I mean, there's three big areas. There's medical costs, which is Medicaid, pensions, and then education. Human services, unfortunately, has been politically an easier place to take money from. And I think that's why Kyle's recommendation of maybe a caucus is essential, because we need to have that voice at the table when these things are going on. But let's not fool ourselves. This is going to be another rough year, another rough couple of years. You know, we're not paying schools what we said we would pay them. We're not paying you what we said we'd pay you. I think that what it's forced, at least in my area, is for organizations to work more closely together, to collaborate on services, to look at, in a sense, redefining, rethinking who they are and how they deliver services. We have to talk about what are the community priorities. I've served all my life in the public and the not-for-profit sector. I came out of seminary and went to work for the National Farm Worker Ministry. I worked for Ecumenical Social Service Agency in Peoria, developed a Peoria Area Labor Management Council. My wife has worked for the Red Cross, so I understand what the not-for-profit sector is. And we have to begin to look at what are our community priorities and how, as not-for-profits, we fit into that as well. And I know how competitive it is. We used to get community development block grant funds in Peoria, and it was look out. I mean, talk about a political process. That was politics at its rawest, was trying to go for those dollars. So it's going to be another couple tough years. We have to talk, more importantly, to one another about how we collaborate. I've seen that happen where organizations have taken some non-traditional approaches in working with other groups to deliver those same services, and that's what it's going to take.
Okay, Representative Hernandez and Burke, I want to have you each do that too, quickly answer, and then I'll go to some specific questions.
Do you want me to
Yep,
answer?
same one on that. Yeah, I think we should get everyone on this. I
Real
agree.
quickly, I agree, pensions we have to, I mean, we have to address. But I sit both on the elementary, secondary, and human services, so I'm a little biased there. So I find that those two areas, education has been hurt tremendously, and then human service is an effect of obviously our economy. So the conscious effort to try to collaborate and find how we can, yes, not be competitive among our nonprofits. That's an ongoing effort. And just, I don't think that we can dismiss that we have to try to explore other revenue sources as well.
Representative Burke.
So obviously pensions need to be reformed, but it doesn't stop there, because the bad news, there's just more bad news behind that. We're 7.2, I think, Representative McSweeny said, in unpaid bills. We have liabilities for our employee health care. There are hospitals in university towns like Champaign who are waiting 400 days to be paid. We don't set aside money for retiree health care, so we pay as you go. So we're exposed to those double-digit costs of health care just like everyone else. We don't have a rainy day fund. So we have a lot of challenges before we've even gotten. We have a lot of challenges just balancing the books. So pension reform, I believe, is job number one, but there are many other liabilities that we need to take care of as well. How do we do that? It's going to be an interesting debate between increasing revenues and decreasing spending, or a combination of both. I don't see how we get through it without some decrease in spending. I wish I could be more optimistic, but I don't see it.
I'm going to ask a couple of specific questions now. The 990s that the Attorney General collects needs to be paperless. Ideally, if the AG asked for more information, services offered, locations offered, we could use that data to really assess needs and gaps. Can you advocate for that?
Are you asking about a data collection center where that would be online? I'm not sure what they're asking.
Yes, I think making the 990s online and being able to use that information that's available on those 990s to help identify service needs and service gaps.
So do they have
I
to
could
be
support,
filed?
yeah, I could
They have to be
support
filed
that.
right now with the AG's office. They're
But
not
as a
necessarily
paper form.
online. Correct.
So they wouldn't have to repeatedly fill out the same paperwork for different responsibilities that they have and for applying to different agencies for money. It would be all housed in one place?
Yes, they have been working on doing that right now. So you have one repository called the Vault, where all agencies can access it. And then would you be advocating to be able to use that information to help identify service needs and gap in the rest of the state?
I think it's a great idea.
All right, I think you got a good
The
answer on
vault's
that.
there, that'd be perfect for the vault, so.
Another one, this one, there's not one easy or affordable system for background checks. This is a hindrance to volunteers. Illinois needs one system that is accessible, digital, and affordable. Can government help make that happen? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Yes.
All right, to the point.
We'd like to see it happen.
Now, one of the issues that Kyle Caldwell raised was about the nonprofit caucus. We heard Representative Pihos suggest that was a good idea, and Senator Koehler. Would the others of you be willing to participate on that?
Yes.
Great. I think there's unanimity for that terrific idea up here on this group, at least. You got all the caucuses covered. What does a nonprofit have to do in order to have input into the policy development that most affects them? What would you recommend for that? Senator Rose.
So, first of all, and I'm a big believer that you guys are going to do it a heck of a lot better than the government can do it. When we get involved, we just tend to screw it up. So, there is that interplay, however. So you need to get a hold of us and tell us what needs to be done differently, what can happen, what the nuts and bolts impact would be to you of policy. The worst phone call to have as a legislator is the angry constituent the day after the vote happened. So please call us before the vote happens. But I do, a former colleague of ours, a guy named Bill Black, who's from Danville, and Bill was the guy you guys may have heard about that threw things at the speaker from time to time. And I think his final parting words were, as he left the House, to this day, I don't know how Representative Park's face landed in my fist. But Bill Black is a very smart guy, and a colorful guy at that. But Bill said, when you let the process work, it works very well. There is nothing wrong with taking the time to do something right. In fact, when government shotguns it and runs it through at the last minute, the last day, at the last hour, it never works right. Which gets me back to the panels. Put together the local panels, invite a group of legislators out, tell them what you do, tell them what you'd like to see done differently, but ask the legislators to bring the administrators from the governor's office who are in charge of that specific area as well. And then put together a working group and let it work. Now, we're unfortunately a little bit late in the year because of the way the General Assembly schedule works, we go back in January through May, but summertime and fall is a great time to do these working groups, and then you come in with an agenda that's largely already been agreed to before you get there. And it works very well when you do it that way.
Senator Van Pelt, I think you wanted to say something, and then it looks like you do too, Representative McSweeny.
Just a suggestion to the Donors Forum. Perhaps the best advocate is someone who already supports your idea, right? So perhaps what you could do is survey the legislators and find out what are their major concerns, what are the issues that's important to them, and then maybe make some suggestions as well. Well, here are a few that are very important. Would you be interested in learning about these as well? Then bring some people together that are members of the Donors Forum who want to talk to the legislator about that particular issue. Because it's a lot easier than going uphill from scratch with someone who doesn't have any idea about what you're talking about versus if they had the experience and they desire to do something about it. Because a lot of us desire to do something about issues that we have no way to move forward on because we don't have the expertise and research that you bring to the table.
Representative McSweeny, and then Pihos.
Senator Rose made a very valid point before that it's going to take the governor's office in a lot of ways to make big changes, especially in the way that nonprofits are treated. So I was thinking, the Lieutenant Governor's office has absolutely no official duties. And I know something about this because I sponsored a constitutional amendment that passed the House to eliminate that office, maybe considered by the Senate, but it won't happen until 2019. Why not? Because nobody has yet been able to tell me, and I took this through committee, I took it through the floor, there are no duties, official duties of the office. Why not make the Lieutenant Governor, who will be around for the next term, at least responsible for the interaction with nonprofits? That's a very useful function. So I think that's a way we don't have to spend any more money. We have an existing office, we have an existing structure. The governor would be very much involved, so that's something I think we should consider.
Great. Anyone else want to add anything to this question? Oh, yes, Representative Pihos.
And I would say that's a great idea. I just mentioned that to Chapin, but we, of course, would hope that person has the passion, you know, to move that forward. I also think if we do form a caucus and within your greater communities you form working groups, two things that need to be done. Having a caucus will streamline getting the information to legislators and having a better ongoing conversation. But I think the other thing we need to do, perhaps amongst us, is survey our fellow legislators. I don't think most of us know how individuals feel about non-for-profits to begin with, what they know about non-for-profits, what they need to know about non-for-profits, and if there are barriers in their thinking, we need to know what our challenges are in order to grow our roots and bring more people on board.
All right, thanks. Now, one item that Senator Van Pelt had mentioned is she said that government wants to understand nonprofit organizations. Question following up on that is what does government want and need to know about nonprofits, and what are some of the best delivery mechanisms for that?
I think you said governors want to know?
Governments.
Yes. What is it that government wants to know about the nonprofit organizations? What do they need and want to know about nonprofits, and suggested methods of delivery for that information?
I don't remember saying
Senator
that.
Koehler? It was a while ago.
I think we've talked about a lot of aspects of that, but I think again, I'll just use the Central Illinois area. We have developed a good core of bipartisan legislators that all serve in somewhat the Peoria area, and we meet together with different organizations. There is a not-for-profit group that meets at Easter Seals like once a month, and we're invited in just to have that discussion. We're also invited as legislators to go out and tour and really get to know all of our not-for-profits. So I think that's the level and the place where that kind of understanding needs to take place, is at the local level.
And does
we
that
can do some
apply-
things at the caucus, but that's a different level.
Would you suggest that applies to administrative on the executive branch side as well as the legislative side, or would you have a different suggestion on the executive side?
Yes, I think it does apply to all.
I think another thing that government wants to know probably is what kind of quality services are people receiving, what portion of the money that is in your non-for-profit budgets is going to direct services to clients or whomever you're serving, and what portion of that money is going to administration. I think that's always an important question that we need to know.
There are many duplicate efforts, according to this author, in the sector. I would also can policy be created to help create mergers between these? I would also suggest that in times of tight resources, I think we've been seeing more mergers as well. Are there things that, or policies that government should be implementing to help create and promote mergers?
Yeah, I just think that there are these silos that exist in government that turn the denotative word bureaucracy into the connotative word bureaucracy, which isn't good. And the more we can knock down, at one point in time, there were 4, if not 5 different entities that are in charge of overseeing development disabled group homes in Illinois. 5. And I remember one of my folks telling me that they had a slip and fall, which happens, and they self-reported because they're a reputable organization, as they're supposed to. They had 3 different entities in the state of Illinois show up. Each one gave a different corrective action plan of what that entity was supposed to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. And the 3 corrective action plans were all in contradiction with each other. So if you did one, you'd be fined on the other 2. That's insane. And actually, that's where the management improvements idea started. But there are still those silos that are out there, and it's going to take time to tear them down.
And down here, I think Representative Burke and then Representative Hernandez.
I think some consolidation is going to be a fact of life, especially as we go through the budgeting for relief process. And I know it can be really difficult. I've got a specific example in my district where an agency that has served developmentally disabled folks for many, many years, and they've grown, and they've sort of grown their service area, and they're now starting to overlap with another group that does the same thing in a different service area, but they're sort of growing toward each other. And so what they've decided to do voluntarily is consolidate their administrative functions in the interest of saving money and also possibly delivering a better service, to their residents and their clients. So I think things like that are that you have to look at. And I know it can be difficult, especially if the group. Where it's somebody's personal mission. They started something from scratch and they built it up, and now it's this wonderful, successful program. It can be hard to turn over those reins or to share the administrative duties with somebody else. But I think in the interest of getting the biggest bang for our buck, it's something that people need to look at.
And just to go along, I experience it within my own task force, just that. They're youth groups offering the same services, and they came together. So I think it's communication between the nonprofits, especially when you have the same services being offered. If there's a communication and you see the bigger picture, it has been done, and I think that just the real commitment you come to together. So it happens already.
And Senator Van Pelt, it looked like you wanted to add something?
Yes, just that I think that, to me, to have the government to come in and try to impose upon the nonprofits to combine, I think that's overstepping our boundaries. But the question was that if I heard it correctly, is that what policies can we put in place to help that process move forward? And I think you all are in a better position to make that recommendation to us. That's how we mostly learn about what policies that we should promote, is they come from outside. So I would say come up with some ideas and then bring it in to us.
Okay, and did you want to add something to this, Representative Pihos? Then we're going to go to the last question.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind everybody, you're in the trenches and you know what your needs are. So I would support what the senator said. Bring those needs to us so we can sort out what we're hearing. I would encourage you to do that.
Now, this last question is another one that I want to go down the entire group and get everyone to give us their answers, and then you guys can go off and get your over-under odds yourself as well. Will there be a decision on pension reform in December? Why don't we start with this end? Let's start.
Playing the odds. Okay. One of my esteemed colleagues, who's a very smart former math professor, pegged it at 43%. So this was a couple weeks ago, so things may have improved since then.
For a fact, I know we're going to be there on the 3rd.
And you'll think we'll get pension reform done, does that mean?
My hope is that we do.
I don't know. I think it's a toss-up.
I say yes. I think there's no other choice for the state, because if we don't adopt pension reform now, we have no chance of getting our fiscal house in order. So I'm going to take a strong stand and say yes.
All right, Dave.
I like that, so I'll say yes too.
My magic 8-ball's been pretty cloudy on this topic from the beginning, and it's pretty cloudy still.
Wait, that wasn't an answer though now.
Cloudy, that's the answer.
I think that when I got there, I thought it would be done by now. I thought it would be done before I got there. I was looking forward to it being finished when I got there.
It's the cloudy.
Yeah, but so, my prayer is that it happens, but my feeling is that it's not likely, and I'm sorry to say that, because the way things are down there, it's really just a couple of people making all the decisions. We have very few decisions to make. Only the few that they present before us. So if it was in my power, we would have had it before I got there.
All right, well, I really want to thank you very much, all the panelists and the audience, for the terrific set of questions, too. Thanks.
Sandy, as always. Senator, good to see you.
Well, thank you all so very much. You've given us a lot of your time. If you can stay and participate in these tabletop discussions, we would love it. But we understand it if you can't. I know there's an important bill signing going on in a little bit, as well as a conference call with the governor around disaster relief and recovery a little later. So anyways, once again, they gave us a lot of very interesting ideas. Some were really working towards solutions. I think it was evident that there's a real willingness to work more closely with us, and also kind of an admission that they really want to understand Donors Forum and nonprofits better. And I think that's all really positive. So even as they leave the room, let's thank them again.